In the last 2.5 years, more oil has been spilled by rail than at any other time in the last 4 decades. The increasing reliance of the oil industry on rail transport and the complete lack of federal oversight of our aging railway system has put millions of people at risk. Joining me now to talk about the growing danger from these oil trains is Desmog blog contributor Justin Mikulka. So Justin, over the last couple years, really, we have seen this dramatic increase in the amounts of accidents in oil by rail. Not long ago, saw one of the first ones of this year. Go ahead and lay out what happened there.
Yeah, so this, as you mentioned, this story of oil by rail has really been developing over several years, starting with most of us became aware of it when an oil train carrying Bakken crude oil crashed in Lac Megantic, exploded. And what happened there, in hindsight, people looked at that and we're asking the question, why did this train explode? Because everyone knows that crude oil doesn't explode. And so as more of those trains kept crashing and exploding, like the two that have in the last month in the U.S., we've learned that Bakken crude oil is explosive because it includes natural gas liquids, things like butane in it when it comes out of the ground. And the oil industry has chosen not to remove those before they put it in these rail cars. And also, we've learned just how slow and ineffective the regulatory process is, because that crash happened in July of 2013 in Lac Megantic. Here we are almost 2 years later. Trains are still crashing, still exploding, because essentially nothing has changed in that time period. So that aspect is trouble.
Well, I was going to say, the only thing really that has changed is the fact that we're seeing so much more of this. What's contributing to this increase? Are there just more oil cars out there, or has something fundamentally changed, perhaps with the aging railway system, with the regulatory system? Why is this becoming a frequent occurrence at this point?
Yeah, well, certainly this industry has ramped up. It really came out of nowhere. And there's so much of this oil being produced in North Dakota, the Bakken oil, that and there aren't pipelines there that go to the coasts where they want to refine it. So they just built a whole new industry to move it by rail, and without any new regulations. And so we've seen the consequences of that. But now what we're seeing is a second phase of the oil by rail industry story, which is the tar sands oil from Canada is also very quickly ramping up and building the infrastructure to move a lot of that tar sands oil across North America, a lot of it through the U.S. to ports in the U.S. And so that's adding a whole second wave of volume and a lot more of these trains, the same tank cars, the same issues. But up until the two recent crashes of tar sands containing trains in Canada, it was assumed that these weren't explosive like the Bakken crude oil. And I myself have been following this industry for more than a year, and I'd written that very thing in the past. And one of the reasons we thought that was because in the new proposed regulations that were put out last year that still haven't been put into place, the regulators said that when these unsafe tank cars, the DOT 111s, could no longer be used for explosive oil like Bakken, they expected they would be transferred to service to move this tar sands oil from Alberta. It says that right in the proposed regulations. What's frightening about that is now that we know that these two tar sands trains have crashed and exploded just like the Bakken oil, and looking into that over the past couple of weeks, it makes total sense, because the way they move tar sands oil is they dilute it, because tar sands itself, the bitumen, is a very thick, tarry substance. To be able to pump it through a pipeline or put it into a rail car, they dilute it. But what they're diluting it with is natural gas condensate, which is the exact thing that makes Bakken oil explosive. So they're intentionally adding the dangerous elements to it to make it easier to ship. And if you look at, I found the industry safety data sheets for this dilbit, the diluted bitumen. They have it classified as the same classification as a flammable liquid as the Bakken oil that was involved in Lac Megantic. So they know it's explosive. And so but that's been a revelation. And it also it shows just, unfortunately, how little the regulators who are writing these regulations know about the products. Hopefully it wasn't intentional, that they were just kind of doing a bait and switch and saying that they could use these unsafe cars for tar sands, but shows there's a real problem in the whole process.
Well, one of the biggest problems, obviously, is the lobbying. I mean, we do the rail industry in general, a hugely powerful player in Washington, D.C. and American politics, but it's not a lobby that anybody ever really talks about because, up until now, it's trains. Trains seem so old-fashioned to us, but really, transport by rail, especially with this, Bakken oil, the tar sands from Canada, that they're making explosive, which that's phenomenal. I didn't know that. I'm sure most of our viewers didn't know that they pull it out of the ground. It's not explosive, and they are essentially adding the explosives to it before they send it through, and that is unbelievable. But it's the lobbying from both the dirty energy industry, from the rail industry, that is helping to keep regulators, one, in the dark, and two, essentially powerless to do anything about this. I mean, is that about the 10,000 foot?
There's been an excellent example of the power of the lobbyist, and just how hard they are working to avoid new regulations. When the last Bakken train crashed in the U.S. in Galena, Illinois, the day after that crash, the American Association of Railroads and most representatives of most of the major players in the rail industry were meeting with regulators at the White House to argue against new regulations. And the two things that they were arguing against were that they don't want to put modern braking systems on these unit trains of oil that can be like a mile long, these massive trains. They don't want to have modern brakes, and they don't want speed limits. And so that was the day after the crash in Galena. An oil train crashed in Canada the day after that meeting. But so in the midst of this unfolding disaster, they are arguing that the last thing they want is modern brakes and/or speed limits. So the brazenness of the industries is incredible, and the effectiveness also. A story that came out this week about the oil industry lobbying efforts regarding this. One of the things I've been writing about over the past year is that if you stabilize this Bakken oil, which is a simple process that the oil industry does in other cases, you take out those natural gas liquids that make it explosive, you wouldn't have the danger of these exploding trains. And the oil industry has lobbied against that throughout this process, and they haven't been required to do it. And there's nothing in the proposed regulations that would require them to do that. Reuters reported a story this week. They had some White House officials say that last year, Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox went to the White House to talk about these regulations and his concerns about the explosive nature of the oil. And apparently the word came from President Obama's chief of staff himself saying, yeah, we're not going to include that in the regulations. So, that was, the biggest issue, safety issue, is this oil is explosive. And they can make it non-explosive by stabilizing it. And the word came directly from the White House. Well, the word came from the oil industry, obviously, but the rail industry is doing the same thing right now. The braking systems on most of these trains were described at an NTSB hearing last year as 19th century technology. So they're just doing the least they can to be able to move as much of this oil as fast as they can.
So they want no speed limits, let us go as fast as we can. They don't want new brakes, let us not be able to stop. I mean, based on what we've seen and what we know, this clearly is a recipe for disaster. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, but this is a phenomenal story. You've done some great work on it. Justin Mikulka, keep it up. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.